This is going to be a short talk on communicating research, which is intended as previewing for the KNAC Summer Research Symposium. My name is Karen Masters, and I'm a professor of astronomy and physics at Haverford College. Okay, so jumping right in, the summer research that you have engaged in, or any research you've been doing during the academic year, is probably your first experience of adding to the sum of human knowledge. When you are doing research, you are no longer studying what is known, but you are investigating what is not known. So a well-articulated research question will keep you focused and inspired to work on your project and allow you to better explain your work to others, whoever they may be. So just in case, articulate is a new word for you. We are using this definition of articulate, which is having or showing the ability to speak fluently and coherently, or being able, or the action of expressing an idea or feeling fluently and coherently. Okay, so before we get started in more detail, let's just talk a little bit about what scientific research is. And so this is from Matt Knight's Illustrated Guide to a PhD, but I think applies to the scientific research that you're doing during your undergraduate degrees as well. If you imagine a circle that contains all of human knowledge, as is in this cartoon, by the time you finish elementary school, you know a little bit about pretty much every different direction of human knowledge. By the time you finish high school, you know a bit more. And now that you are engaged on your bachelor's degree, you are gaining a specialty. So your knowledge is poking out in one direction in particular, or in several directions in particular. If you read research papers, you are reading in a specific topic right to the edge of human knowledge. So you're really pushing out in one direction right to the edge of human knowledge. And there at the boundary, you're going to need to focus. And as you're doing your research, you're going to be pushing at this boundary for a few years until you add a little bit to the sum of human knowledge. This cartoon is meant to illustrate what a PhD is, so that's obviously rather more substantial body of research than you're engaging in right now. But even so, that little tiny dent you've made is really what the PhD is. And so putting this back in perspective, if we zoom back out to the sum of all human knowledge, you have to recognize that these contributions are just little tiny divots in that sum of human knowledge. Nevertheless, they're important contributions. And so it's important that we are able to communicate what we're doing precisely and in an engaging way. One way that is one way to think about communicating your research is this research question triangle that you can read about online. In this triangle, the top of the triangle is the topic, and then you get narrower and narrower down to the point of the triangle. So as an example for something I'm interested in, the topic is extragalactic astronomy. A bit narrower, I'm interested in spiral galaxies. A bit narrower than that, I'm interested in galactic bars in spiral galaxies, these linear structures across the center of the spiral galaxy. And so my research question, building into that topic, narrower, subtopic, and focus, might be something like, how do galactic bars influence the flow of interstellar gas in a spiral galaxy? So now you are engaging on research, you are working in a specific topic or field, subfield of astronomy or astrophysics. You are developing specific knowledge and expertise, and your research question that you're working on needs to be specific and designed to lead to new knowledge and discovery. And obviously your supervisor is going to help you with these different steps. Now, if you're thinking about communicating your research, one of my top pieces of advice here is to always think about your audience. So we'll start with thinking about communicating research to other researchers. And it's just one of those realities that part of your academic journey is going to be learning about field-specific customs. So in order to be better at communicating your research to other researchers, you need to get familiar with how other researchers in your field communicate their research. So my top advice here is to attend a lot of seminars. Really try to attend the seminars that your department runs or nearby departments. Take notes in seminars. I take notes on content. You might also want to take notes on speaker behavior, and I recommend that these are private notes, of course. And at the end of a talk, think about what worked well and what didn't in that researcher's communication of their research to you. Don't consider it to be your problem if you don't understand the research area, but think about what the presenter could have done better to bring you along better, to explain their research better. And that activity will help you to improve your ability to communicate your research. And then, you know, the other way that we communicate with researchers is through scientific papers. So there's really no shortcut. You just need to read scientific papers. One way to do this is through a journal club, maybe with your research group or your supervisor. And also, you know, writing papers is a really good experience for learning how to write papers. You all have taken a step along that journey by writing a paper for the KNAC, for this KNAC symposium. But there's really no shortcut to revision and editing and basically improving your paper as you go along. Okay, and just there's a lot of cartoons about communicating research, a little bit about seminars, academic seminars. This is a little bit of a joke about how common certain things are in academic seminars that you might enjoy looking at later. I mentioned taking notes in seminars, and I'm a big fan of this technique. This was advice I got when I started my PhD at Cornell University. For me, taking notes in a seminar prevents me from getting distracted and keeps me focused on the seminar. And also, obviously, then I have a summary of the seminar at the end that I can review over. There's a lot of strong opinions out there on handwriting versus typing when you're taking notes. There really is evidence that handwriting can help with memory and retention, the physical act of writing on paper. There are some departments or fields that will discourage use of laptops. You may have come across that. However, you know, of course, typing creates a searchable document for later. So if this is a new field for you, that can be incredibly useful. And also, we should acknowledge there are accessibility issues with handwriting. It's not as easy for everyone. So my opinion is to do whatever you're more comfortable with, but take notes just for the action of listening better to take those notes. If we now move on to talking about communicating your research now outside of academia, outside of other researchers, we call this public engagement and outreach. Public engagement is supposed to be the sort of two-way conversation, and outreach is telling people what you do. You know, it's my view that public engagement and outreach is a responsibility for publicly funded researchers. Not everyone is publicly funded, but I think all the time, but I think it's still a useful thing to do. My personal opinion, that it's fun. Not everyone thinks that, but I think it's undeniable that it will help you gain skills and confidence in public speaking to a variety of audiences. And just to reflect, there are many audiences. So if you want to engage in a public engagement activity, think about the audience within the public, or the many types of the public that interests you most to work with. So that could be children, enthusiastic amateurs in your field, policymakers, all kinds of different ways that you can do public engagement and outreach. When you are communicating your research outside of academia, always think about cutting the jargon that you use. Explain your research in the simplest way that is correct. And one great way to sort of practice this and get better at this is to practice this on your friends and family. So here is an exercise to think about, and we'll discuss this in the discussion session. So who is a research paper title written for? And how would you explain your project differently to your friends or family? So you might have one very technical sounding research paper title and a very different way to explain it if you're explaining it outside of the field. So if you've submitted a paper to this KNAC symposium, your task now is to rewrite that research paper title in the form of a tweet, which is basically just a shorthand for a very short sentence. So here's an example. This is actually my PhD thesis. The title of my PhD thesis was Galaxy Flows in and Around the Local Supercluster. And the way I decided to turn that into a relatively simple language tweet was to say ways to measure the motions of nearby galaxies and then use them to make a map of our intergalactic neighborhood. Oh, and by the way, there's this hashtag share my thesis on Twitter, which has examples of lots of people doing this. So I mentioned Twitter, and just want to talk about whether or not it's appropriate for academics to tweet. I do tweet, and I have for a number of years, so I'm obviously on the pro side. I believe this is an excellent networking platform. It allows you to practice your communication skills. If you follow an interesting set of people, you can keep on top of the news in your field. And it can be public engagement if you get retweeted or if you have followers who are not academics. For many academics who tweet, it is not public engagement because all of their followers are other academics. Some of the cons of tweeting is that some academics still see this as a complete waste of time. You can, of course, accidentally tweet stupid stuff. It can be distracting if you cannot stop yourself from following trends, and you can fall into, all these Twitter wars and arguments and things, which is all a bit of a waste of time. But used the right way, I believe Twitter can be helpful. Some of my tips for getting started with Twitter: you actually don't need an account to look at other people, but tweets. But if you want to follow people or sort of set up a curated stream, you will need an account. I recommend using your name as your Twitter handle. And then if you meet tweeters at conferences in the future, they're going to know your name rather than your cutesy username handle like Astrobaby or Cool Dude, or the two stupid examples I came up with. When you get started with Twitter, basically seek out other academics and the big departments and centers in your field. This will kind of automatically start the suggestions, stop them from being celebrity tweeters and turn them into academic tweeters in your field. And so then it becomes easier to grow the list of people you follow. And I strongly recommend keeping your social media accounts, keeping one professional and one personal. Don't mix those two. Don't be tweeting about your drinks and your night out on the same Twitter account you're trying to use for public engagement. That's my recommendation. You can be human and personable on your professional Twitter account, but have a separate personal one. And I like this from XKCD on tweeting. So I don't get why authors and comedians spend so much energy trying to be clever on Twitter. Couldn't they put that creativity into more books and scripts? Is there something they like about the 140 character format? Yeah, writers working under tight restrictions produce novel material, like, for example, epigrams employing backward alphabetization. Whoa. So, I'm a firm believer that the practice that you can get from tweeting, putting things in simple language and simplifying it so it can fit into a single tweet, will make you a more efficient communicator in all of your types of writing. Okay, and just to wrap up, I have some suggested activities. So here is the first activity that we will do. In a small group, we're going to introduce yourself, where you study and where you did your summer research. Write down the 5 keywords which describe your field and your specific area, thinking about that research triangle that we talked about. Here is an example on the American Civil War, Battle of Gettysburg, townspeople. What role did Gettysburg's residents play during the Battle of Gettysburg? And then you're going to share this with your group and explain the links and write down your research question or rephrase your research question. Our second activity will be a classic elevator pitch activity. You imagine that you're at a conference and you get into the lift with a big name in your field. Lift is a British word for elevator, by the way. In pairs, please take it in turns to practice introducing yourself and your thesis work or your research work in 30 seconds. Tips for this: make sure to say your full name and probably your institution. Don't talk too quickly, but also get to the point quickly. And so practicing this actually will make you better at it. So I do recommend this. And then the final activity, which is probably a take-home activity, is, if you following this elevator pitch, you've met the big name in the field, you want the person who Googles you after meeting you in the elevator to be able to find your professional details. So I recommend that you put something sensible on the web with your name. One way to do this would be via a professional LinkedIn profile. As students, it's not too early to do this. You can include just basic details, a name, a professional picture of yourself. So it's not the profile picture from Facebook, some details of your education background, and you should include this research experience, including the topic, but also the tools and skills that you have developed through this research experience. If you're going to write about your research, you want to include some kind of working research title or paper title, brief context and background, a jargon-free description of your research aim, what implications your finding could have, and if you're not sure, that's a discussion to have with your supervisor. And you might want to include funders and collaborators, names of funders and collaborators. Okay, so just to summarize this short talk on research communication, as a student working in research, you are embarking on new and original research, which is adding to the sum of human knowledge. You want to be able to communicate this to a variety of audiences in a variety of settings. So Viva is a British research defence exam. So this is giving away that this talk is modified from a talk to British research students. But never mind that, including big names in the field. And you also want to be able to explain it to your family, friends, and other members of the public. I'm a firm believer that good communication is a skill which can be learned. You need to observe to develop your style, and you need to practice. It is not always easy for everyone, and so we get better through practice. And just a final comment, don't lose the big picture in the details. You take time to regularly revisit the main point of your research and remind yourself why you signed up to do research in the first place. And remember that you're pushing the boundary of human knowledge.